The topic for this week's podcast might be a little confusing, but let's just dive on in. This week's podcast is All Zebras Live in the Zoo. Well, you can make that statement. I believe that all zebras live in the zoo. But just because you say, I believe all zebras live in the zoo, doesn't mean that your belief is true. In fact, there are some beliefs that people have, maybe even church denominations have, that are just simply not true. So just because you say, I believe, doesn't mean it's actually true. Just like you could say, I believe all zebras live in the zoo. And if you want to come be part of my church, you also have to believe with me that all zebras live in the zoo. Even if we know there are some wild zebras, we know there are some zebras that live in protected animal habitats, and we know that not all zebras live only in a zoo. A while back, I spent some time looking at church websites, and I did that while I was writing this book, The Christian Response to LGBTQ. And in this book, on page 57, I talk a little bit about what I found when I was looking specifically at the mission and vision statements of specific churches and what it is that they claim is their mission and vision for the church. What is it that they desire to accomplish? What is it that guides their activities? And the vision would be, and I would say that I did find in my study a mission and vision statements of some denominations, some very large denominations. They really need a workshop on how to make a mission and vision statement because some of them are not very clear on what a mission and vision statement actually is. A vision statement is if you are successful in your goals and in your mission, your vision is the result of that. And a lot of churches do not have that correct. Let me tell you where I got to this point where I was concerned about churches that says, I believe all zebras live in the zoo. A couple of years ago, one of my children was offered a job in ministry at two different churches. And I was curious about the beliefs of these churches. They were not mainstream denominations, or they weren't ones that I actually knew a great deal about. So basically, I was just being nosy, and I dived into these churches' websites, looking at what they said they believed and what they don't believe, and what things were important. I wanted to see their mission and vision statements. Some of them, not all churches actually have mission and vision statements, which it's kind of like how do you guide and direct your ministries of your church if you don't have a mission? So anyway, so that was one thing that kind of concerned me. But I got concerned when I looked at one of these churches with which my son was offered a job. Um, he actually turned down this church's job and took the position with the other church, only to find himself a few months later actually accepting the other job. And what I found was when I went to the website, and I've actually explored the website of the churches of my other children as well, because I'm concerned about my kids getting bad information from their religious organizations to whom they belong. And I'm even more concerned about my grandkids being raised in churches where there are some beliefs that are actually grounded in bad theology. But anyway, when I got to some of these websites, and also in preparing to write that book several years ago, in studying these church websites, I got into what is it they say they believe. And some of them said, we believe, and then they stated something that, well, you can believe that, but that's just not actually true. In some of these churches, they made statements that they didn't even realize they were making statements that were silly. Like they said, we believe in biblical marriage. Well, no, you don't. Do you know what biblical marriage is? Go through the Old Testament and look at what biblical marriage was. If a man dies, one of his brothers or family members are then responsible for taking their brother or relative's widow in and lying with her and producing more children. That's what biblical marriage is. That's one of the definitions of biblical marriages. A man can have multiple wives. That's biblical marriage. So, a church that right there on the website says, we believe in biblical marriage, well, I would stay away from that church just because they're ignorant. They really don't know what biblical marriage is, or they do, and they're using words that they know that will uh, trick the gullible people that want to hear that without even really understanding. So I don't know why a church would want to uh, have people that really are not interested in knowing the truth about what the Bible says, because these are churches that claim to be Bible-based churches, but then they make ridiculous statements like that. The other thing where I have concern is when the church says we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. Well, that can be your opinion that you think that's what marriage should be, but if you say we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, then that's like saying all zebras live in the zoo, because that's not actually true. Um, if you lived in Morocco, you could have 4 wives. So in that case, marriage is between one man and up to 4 women. One man and up to 4 women is marriage in the country of Morocco. So if your church says we believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, well, that's already a false belief. Now, what the church website could say, if that's what they're trying to communicate, and I think it is, they just don't know how to communicate that. They need to say, in our fellowship, we support marriage of one man and one woman. Now, I guess they could say that, but it is a fact that there are many countries where marriage is defined differently. In the United States, currently, and may not always be this way, but a man can marry another man, a woman can marry another woman, a man can marry a woman can marry a man. In all of those cases, they can get divorced and then they can marry someone else. So, in that case, well, their marriage was one man and one woman, but if you're looking at the president of the United States, the man was married to a woman, had an affair with another woman who got pregnant. So he divorced the first woman to marry the second woman and then cheated on her with another woman who he then married. And then when she got pregnant, had an affair with another woman. And technically, we're saying we believe marriage is between one man and one woman. And then you support that mess? Now, if that's what you think, then you're just a crackpot. And so there's really no point in this conversation. But here's the problem. If a church is truly called to minister and love and share the love of Jesus and teach people about loving God and loving others and changing the world, Why would you make a blanket statement on your webpage? We believe marriage is between one man and one woman. That's like saying, we believe all zebras live in the zoo. Well, that's just not true. All marriage is not between one man and one woman. That's fact. That all marriage is not between one man and one woman. It just isn't that way. It hasn't been that way in biblical history, and it's not that way today. So when a church posts something like that on their website, why would they do that? They're not doing that for the people that attend their church. They're doing that to keep people away from the church. And that's kind of a whole issue. What do you do if you're a church and a couple comes to your church and they're already married, and if they happen to be the same gender? There is a scripture that says wherever you find someone when they decide to follow the life and teachings of Jesus, whether you use the terminology get saved or decide to follow Jesus, the scripture says God takes people where they are and they move forward. So that means if they're already married and they come to your church, that's the state in which they and their family are. It's not the church's place then to tear that family apart. The church hasn't said, okay, you have to get a divorce because you can't be married to someone of the same gender. Well, if they already are, what do you do? That's the same thing if a transgender person comes to your church, gets saved, decides to follow the life and lessons of Jesus. Does the church then say, you have to untransition? Oh, you're a trans female? They already took your penis, filleted it, turned it inside out, and made a vagina? And you want them to undo that surgically? I don't know that that could be undone surgically, actually. So what do you do? That's worrying about a whole bunch of stuff that we don't even worry about. Um, Jesus called his disciples to come and be fishers of mankind. Come, follow me. Learn to be fishers of mankind. You're learning how to fish and draw people in to the life lessons and uh, the life and lessons of following Jesus, loving God, loving others, changing the world. When I was a young boy, probably about 7, 8, 9 years old, I lived in Scotland. And I remember one time we went out on a fishing boat. And even though I was very small, I still remember that. I remember the images. You don't often think and remember things as a child other than looking at pictures and said, oh, yeah, I remember that. Well, you do remember that, or you've seen that picture so long. But there were no pictures taken while we were on that fishing boat. And I do remember the fishing. And I remember as the fishing boat was moving there in the sea, we came across a whole school of cod. We liked cod in that part of the North Atlantic. That's what we liked, was codfish, and that's what we were actively fishing for. So we were in a whole school of cod, and we had these. They were racks like this with the fishing line, which is almost like small rope with 7 or 8 hooks on it, and you'd unroll that and just throw it out over the side of the boat. And then wind those racks over and over and pull it. And there'd be a fish on every hook, even without any bait, because we didn't have time to put more bait on it. And we were actively fishing for cod. That's what we were hoping to catch. You need to know that every fish that was caught that day was not cod. We caught other fish as well. So if your church has a mission and a vision, and I think your mission is to minister to the people around your church or the people that are apt to come into the fellowship of your church in your neighborhood. Obviously, the churches where I go have a specific mission to a group of people. Now, neither one of my churches specifically have a mission to minister and draw in people from Corpus Christi. Why? It's a 3-hour drive away. The mission of our church is not to draw in and minister to the people in Corpus Christi. That's not the mission of our church. It's in our area. But if someone from Corpus Christi wanders into the church, we're there to minister to them. So no matter what the neighborhood is of your church or who your mission is, who your church feels called to, above all else, you are fishers of mankind. God calls us to ministry to everyone who crosses our path, everyone who walks into our space, everyone who crosses our path. I said that already, but everyone who crosses our path, everyone who enters our door, that's who we're to minister to. No exceptions, no excuses. So if you're at a church and a couple comes into your church and they're married and they're the same gender, or maybe one's transgender, so they're no longer the same gender. If they're post-op, what are you going to do? Strip them off naked? I tell you what, you strip them off naked, a trans woman looks just like a biologically born woman. You won't know the difference. So in that case, is it okay? And what business is it of the church to making those decisions? It's not. Jesus called his disciples and in turn calls us to be fishers of mankind. Love God, love all people, and change the world. That's it. That's all we're called to do. And going so far as to take your church website and making a statement that says, we believe all zebras live in the zoo. The only reason for putting that on a church website is making sure anyone who doesn't believe the same thing about zebras, don't bother coming here because we don't want you here. So when a church says, we believe marriage is between one man and one woman, well, that simply is not factual. All marriages are not between one man and one woman. That's not the world we live in. And guess what? Jesus calls us to minister in the world in which we are found. Okay? The only reason a church would go through the steps of putting that on their webpage would be to keep people out. That statement is not on their webpage for the people that are members and in ministry in their church. It's just not. That's not the people that's there for. So when one of my children was considering two different job offers in two different churches, and one of them on their website says, we believe all marriage is between one woman and one man, my first thought is, well, they're kind of stupid people, aren't they? Because in fact, that's not what all marriage is. Not all marriages are between one man and one woman. Look at the person that people that call themselves Christians supposedly voted for in the last presidential election. One man who was married to 3 women and cheated on all of them. Who knows how many mistresses this man had in his life? Probably not so many now because he's old, fat, and disgusting. But you just don't know. So this statement has nothing to do with saying we believe in morality and monogamy and relationships. Maybe that's a statement the church could believe in. They believe in honesty. We believe in loving all of our neighbors. Anyway, so this topic may seem kind of unusual, but this topic is right on point. In fact, I had started writing a book that had this title, all zebras live in the zoo. And that was about the time I was having such difficulty with my eyesight. Working on the computer and word processing is no longer something I'm able to do. Uh, I I gave up writing books, and then I was going through the drafts that I had, and this one I thought, well, it's almost done. You know, it practically was done except for last editing and adding questions to each chapter. So I went ahead and finished this one, but this was the last one that I completed. But several years ago, I did do research into the mission and vision statements of churches in this book, The Christian Response to LGBTQ, which kind of really does dovetail into the topic of this podcast. You know, this is a really, really good book. It's not very thick, it's an easy read. Uh, this continues to be one of my best selling books, which makes me quite pleased because to me, the message of this book is my legacy of what I want to outlive me. Um, Too bad every church that's out there does not already follow uh, the thoughts and ideas that I express in here, but maybe one day. I'll be long dead before that happens, but maybe one day the actual, real Christian church will finally reach the mission and vision Jesus gave us. If you appreciate this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.